which kind of exists concurrently. And there are many, many internets, but the internet is really just, it's not really well defined, but it's like broadly the big thing that all the computers are kind of connected to, and then it's so big that it's like kind of well defined in that sense. So yeah, to not have any connection to the internet, you would have to basically air gap your device. And air gapping just means you have a device that just, you make it not able to connect to the internet. So that would be what they do at the NSA. You have to like leave all your devices outside, and then anything that goes in and out of the air gap room has to be like a physical, just not computer, like a flash drive. And then they have other security features for that. Anyway, so to try and understand like all the infrastructure on the internet, we're going to start building an analogy here. So I want you to think of a computer as a person. And so the internet is then all the people who are connected and communicate with each other. Obviously there are recluses, you know, maybe living in a cave somewhere, so they're not connected. So that would be like an intranet, or maybe I guess the Amish. Well, the Amish actually do communicate with people. So people in the Amazon, like they don't have any connection to the outside world. That would be a bit like an intranet.
That Amazon.
Yes, sorry, the Amazon raiders. But another internet would be, let's say you have a building. So you have a building that people who work together or live together, and you send internal communications, and people outside of the building aren't privy to those internal communications unless they do something illegal, right? So you can send communications to a building, but you can't send them to a person, right? Like, because when you address it, you address it to the person, but the postal carrier doesn't give it to the person, he just sticks it in your mailbox. So that you have to kind of trust that the building will route the mail correctly to the person. So for instance, your parents sorting through the mail says, oh look, this one's yours, this one's mine. But actually they could, in principle, secretly read your mail. So there's kind of an implicit trust there. So then, in this analogy, you know, let's start low level. What's a router? A router, as its name implies, is something that routes. So it routes your internet traffic to the intended destination, and then the response traffic comes back to you. So here, I can kind of use the board here. It's going to start getting a little bit confusing. So you know, you've got your computer, right? And then it goes to this router. I don't know how to draw a router. I'll just do this, it doesn't matter. And then this kind of goes to the internet. I don't know, this is the symbol we use sometimes, right? Something like that. But we'll slowly make this thing a bit bigger over time. Okay. Internet. So, yeah, so it's vaguely going to the internet. But we'll make that clearer in a bit. Because remember, that's another computer somewhere, right? So the router in the analogy is the person who takes your mail to the post office and then takes the incoming mail to you. So maybe like the secretary in a building, right? You just drop it off in the outgoing box, and then somebody will take it to the mailbox or the post office and then send it off. And then they also collect mail, and then they give it to your cubicle or whatever. Okay. Right. So I will skip some of this. If we have time, I can come back to it. But it was about MAC addresses and browsers, so there's some interesting stuff there. Okay, so what's an IP address? Because you sometimes hear that, it's an IP address. So an IP address is just a string of numbers assigned to you that identifies your kind of your location on the internet, in the global internet thing. So a string of numbers, right? So a little bit like an address, and it kind of works the same way. Because so you have a public IP address. Let's just stick with that one for a moment. So the public IP address is like your house number and address that's assigned by the government. So your IP address is similarly assigned to you. You can't really pick it. You can maybe if you're rich enough. The richer you are, the more easily you can pick it. Just probably like with an actual address. So someone just assigns it to you, and then that's how other people are able to communicate with you. In the same way that if I want to communicate with Sam, I want to send him snail mail. He has been assigned a house address, and I would send stuff through the post to him.
How they find you.
Exactly. But most people don't use IP addresses. I mean, like, when's the last time someone typed in a bunch of numbers into the browser to go to a website? Usually you type in like a URL, right? Like it's a domain. So what's a domain? A domain is just an easier to remember name. Like usually preferably human readable, but not always, that's associated with the IP address. So it's like, I don't know what the address for this building is, but I know this is Joshua Medical Center. I'm sure someone knows the address, it doesn't matter. But that's like the domain name. It's the thing that you remember, and then it's associated with the building. So similarly, a domain name is associated with an IP address. But not always. So obviously the buildings are unnamed. Like your house is probably not named, unless you're in England. Then apparently some old houses have names.
Many old houses.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Well, okay. I'm in Oxford, so there are a lot of newer houses that don't. Anyway, so people don't memorize IP addresses, and they also generally don't memorize business addresses. You just remember the house, you remember the business address, the business name, and also the website name. Now, you do remember your house address, though, so sometimes it can be useful to remember your own IP address, depending on what you need to do. So I had my IP address in university memorized for a long time because it was a bit annoying to point a domain to it, and I had a static one that wouldn't change, so I ran a server off it. You may probably remember downloading photos off of it a few times. Yeah. Okay, so then there's this thing called a DNS. So you may have heard of it. So let's extend this a bit in a moment. So a DNS stands for a domain name system. So it obviously has to do with the domain that we mentioned earlier. So DNS is a bit like a phone book. So you have the URL, or the business name in the analogy, and then you want to know what IP address that it corresponds to, what address that corresponds to. So sorry if the younger people don't know what a phone book is. I'm sure you do. So you flip through it, you find the business, and then it tells you the address. And so that's what a DNS basically is. So really, let's say you're going to google.com. Oh, I'm gonna switch. Google.com. That's what you want to go to. So the first thing that has to happen is that this actually goes to a DNS. Google. And then this responds with like a bunch of numbers. I don't remember Google's IP address, unfortunately.
Just do 8.8.8.8.
No, that's the DNS server.
Oh, right.
Yeah, not the actual website.
Well, you actually, technically, you have to get to their DNS server first.
You don't. You could use Firefox's DNS server. It's also be fine.
I guess for Google, but
yeah,
for
right, like because there are multiple DNS servers. So really, there's a lot of implicit trust that we put in DNS servers, in the same way that you kind of have to trust a phone directory. But in principle, if they're evil, that can cause problems for you. So think about that, threat model, all that stuff. So now you know the IP address, and now you tell the router, okay, this IP address, and then the router finds this specific computer somewhere, right? Because this is actually another computer. And then this computer responds back with some data like that, right? Okay. So that's like sort of minimum. If we add the stuff with the browser, it's a little bit more complicated, but again, if we have time. Okay, now, you don't just randomly have internet, unless you're disgustingly rich. No, trust me, I looked into this because I was like, can I do it myself? Yeah. You need to get internet from an internet service provider. Okay, so the reason you need to be disgustingly rich, because I was like, could you be your own ISP? You can, if you have crap tons of money and can lay down the cables and do all the government contract stuff to be allowed to lay the cable. So it's a pretty complicated thing. So you get internet from some contract you sign with an internet service provider, and oftentimes the internet service provider gives you your router. Most people I think don't buy their own routers. So that's kind of roughly how this works. So now let's think about the threats, because we want to talk about threat models, right? So what's the threat model for your internet traffic in general? So let's think with the analogy for a moment, because it's a bit easier, right? If I want to send mail to Sam, who will actually have the ability to read the contents? That's the first thing. And then the other question is, who will know that I've written to Sam? So the people who in principle have the ability to read the letter that I sent to Sam are me, and then my office secretary, let's say in the analogy, and then the postal service, and then Sam's office secretary, and then Sam. And then also anyone who intercepts the mail service and steals it, which I've seen happen in real life. So that's a thing that can happen, right? So we sort of ignore that for physical mail because there are a lot of protections against it. It's a federal crime. I think it's a felony, actually. But in the internet, it's a lot easier to surreptitiously steal mail. That guy that I saw steal it got caught instantly, and so I don't know what happened to him, but that's a felony. If you steal stuff off the internet, people don't even know. And part of the reason is because the way, let's say, Wi-Fi works. It's different if you have the Ethernet cable, but the way Wi-Fi works is your computer basically is shouting really loudly to the router. It just says, "Ah!" and the router says, okay, I got it. But like literally anybody else can hear it. So if you're sitting in the same room with somebody else, in principle, they might be able to read all of your internet traffic. So that it depends on a few things. But if you're using a public Wi-Fi, oftentimes you need to assume it's possible that your internet traffic is being can be intercepted. And so again, in the analogy, or back from the analogy, I should say, then those correspond to, again, me, and then my router, and then my internet service provider, and then Sam's internet service provider, and then Sam's router, and then Sam. And then anyone who's doing a man-in-the-middle attack is what it's called, where you can kind of look in the middle. Right, so then how would I prevent someone from being able to read what I sent to Sam? Well, you can obfuscate the stuff, right? You can encrypt it. So encryption, of course, has been around for thousands of years. You know, Caesar had the Caesar shift cipher, but in modern times, cryptography is a very confusing area of research. I took a class in it, but math is just, let's not go into it. We kind of have to assume that the cryptography is good. Unfortunately, it's not always true. There have been zero-day attacks and this and that, but a lot of smart people are working on it. So I think for our purposes, we just have to assume that it's, if you're getting really paranoid, I guess you can just do physically, handing things directly to people. But otherwise, yeah, you'll have to trust that cryptography works. So our traffic is generally handled over SSL. So that's when you see in your URL, it goes HTTPS. That S means it's secure. So what is SSL? What is this encryption stuff? So in the analogy, it's like instead of sending Sam something just straight up through the, in a letter inside an envelope, I put the letter inside of a box with a lock on it. And just for simplicity, the box is indestructible and the lock is indestructible. And then Sam has the other key. Now, it's not exactly how cryptography works, but let's just keep it simple. I have a key, he has a key. I send him the box, then he can open it, and he can read it. So if you're using SSL, the protocol has an S usually, so it's HTTPS, or SFTP, or SSH, and then your browsers nowadays will put a little lock icon, so you'll see it there. So there's a lot of internet protocols. You've got HTTP, FTP, SSH, WebDAV, there's a bunch of other things. Most people don't have to worry about anything other than HTTP and occasionally FTP. So that only solves part of the problem though, because remember there were two questions I asked earlier. Who can read the contents, but also who can know I've sent something to Sam? Because maybe I don't even want people to know I've communicated with Sam. Because what if Sam is somebody who's a person of interest by the government, for instance, and I don't want them to know I'm connected to it. So SSL doesn't prevent that. The encryption doesn't prevent that because they can't see what I wrote, but they can see that I sent something. So there, and this is relevant because there have been people arrested in England for downloading certain books. Now, most things these days are federated by SSL, so the traffic itself is encrypted. How did they get arrested though? Because they could still see, for instance, they were going to HTTPS, //website.com/bandbook.pdf, right? Like they don't need to see what's in the PDF. They're like, that's banned, so you have to look at it. So then you get arrested. As Americans, we're generally not okay with that kind of stuff because it's like freedom of speech. I should be able to read it, right? So what are the solutions for that? Well, one is potentially a VPN, which you see a lot of ads for, right? So a VPN is a virtual private network. So now, instead of going directly to the website, I go to, actually I guess I could have kept this, but I'll just write it. So you go to this VPN, okay, and then the VPN sends a request to the computer, and then sends, so there's an extra chain in the link. So why does this help? Well, it doesn't always help. So somebody tried to set up a VPN once in their own house. That would not help, because the point is, the way a VPN works is you've got like thousands and thousands of people all doing this. And so all your traffic kind of gets mixed together, and then now you can't tell who's doing what. Except the VPN still can. So you're still trusting that the VPN is not evil. Right? So someone's always being trusted, unfortunately. But if you have a VPN in your own house, it doesn't help. Now you're just mixing all the people in your house's traffic. But the problem was probably that you didn't want people to know anyone in the house was looking at certain things. So a VPN, by design, has to be some like thing that's massively used by people, and so you have to just either trust it or not use it. So I think there's a lot of these, but I think they tend to, because people are vaguely afraid of not having privacy anymore, they'll say, oh, you can use NordVPN or ExpressVPN, like they have Surfshark. There's like a billion of these ads now. And then they claim all kinds of things. But if you understand what's actually happening, then you can make a more informed decision about whether it actually solves your specific use case. I think most of the time, it probably doesn't. It probably doesn't. So one thing a VPN does do is, because it's another computer, this can sit in other countries. So one thing they say you can do, which is true, is you can, let's say something is banned in the US, then you can VPN to something in, I don't know, Germany, and then you can watch the stuff that you can watch in Germany, because the website thinks it's getting a request from Germany, because it can't see this stuff, right? It only sees this request.
A lot of people in China use
exactly.
VPNs,
So Chinese people use VPNs.
Access Google, American Google, or whatever.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
For the record, if you're trying to protect yourself from the website knowing who you are, if you're logging in, you're defeating the purpose of the VPN.
Right. Well, I was going to get to that in a moment with Tor anyway. So this question really is just, like, you can do this, but if you're just doing it without thinking, right, that's what we don't want to do. We want to exercise will. So this question is, do you trust your ISP more, your internet service provider more, or the VPN more? And I can't answer that. It depends who your ISP is, and depends who your VPN is.
Can you give some examples of ISPs, common ISPs that everyone uses?
I mean, in the US.
Back in the day.
Sorry?
Boomers used AOL
That's
back in
not
the day.
nice.
is that-
That's not ISP. So the big ISPs
Comcast.
nowadays, the big three that like have huge market share of the US, I think is like Cox, Comcast, and
Verizon.
Oh, yeah.
Not Charter, Spectrum?
yeah, there's like
So
around
those
here
are-
there's like Spectrum and stuff, and yeah, so they're all ISPs.
So some ISPs branch off of other ones. So like, if you're getting from like a smaller ISP, they're actually just buying a different contract from a bigger
Yes,
ISP.
yeah, and that's again because it's all about whether they have the money to lay the cables down. So when they subcontract, it's because they don't actually own the cables, and they don't want to lay their own cables, so they're just renting the cables, basically.
Yeah.
But it probably means if they're doing that, that the bigger one can also still see all the stuff. So you're just adding extra chains, but the point is people, they can see stuff if they want. And this is, again, all assuming your router is not evil. So every single chain in this, or every single link in the chain, you have to be like, is this evil? Can this try and mess with me? Or not, but like that's the point. Like you have to think about what your threat model is, right? So there's another possibility. It's called Tor. Sometimes also called like an onion network. So the idea with Tor is instead of this, and then this, and then or VPN into this, you go through like it's usually like 4 nodes. So you go computer, 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 and then there, right? And the way the system is designed, so thankfully Tor as a protocol is open source. So we know that it actually does what it claims it does. So the idea is every single node can't see the previous node. And I think I don't remember exactly how it works, but it's like, there's a lot of protection in there. So functionally, you can assume Tor is at least safe within bounds of what it's supposed to do, which is prevent this website from knowing you've accessed who you are that accessed it, and then also prevent the government from knowing what website, or ISP or whatever, from knowing what websites you are going to.
Ming-Yee, how do you spell Tor again?
TOR.
It stands for the onion router, by the way. And
Oh, I actually didn't know that. Okay, fair enough.
And the specification is that no link in the chain can know who's talking to who and what they're talking about, unless the person who wants to know owns 51% or more of the nodes in the system.
Right. So the people have thought about this quite a bit. And so it's pretty anonymous in the sense that it is actually perfectly anonymous within what it's promising, but it's not foolproof because the Tor itself kind of is, but people who use it are not. So if you have bad operation security, like you do stuff in a stupid way, you will still basically be de-anonymized and not have privacy. So the example that Matthew gave earlier, yeah, if you log in on Gmail on Tor, now Gmail still knows you logged into them, actually. That's kind of how it works. So that doesn't help you stay anonymous. So if you were to do that, you don't want to be logging in with an identifiable account. If you make a throwaway account, that's fine because that's not linked to anything. Obvious other things are using your credit card. So people are like, I will buy this illegal weapon on this account, this credit card under my name. So that did not help them at all. They just got arrested. Another is mailing it to their physical address with their name. Also doesn't help because they'll be like, okay. Because the government knows that the government also can use Tor, actually, right? They can also do these things. So they can monitor these things, and then they're just like, oh, look, and then they just have to watch the stuff come in, see where it goes, and then arrest you, right? If you download stuff, that can also be bad. Like if you're like, this is an incriminating file, let me download it to my phone, and then you're caught with it, and that also doesn't help. So that's happened before. These are all real examples of things that have happened. The device itself can be compromised. If you're using a work computer, depends, but your work computer could have a keylogger on it. It could, or maybe the government specifically targeted you because you're a person of interest, and they put some kind of thing on your phone when you weren't looking. All kinds of things like that. There's a very complicated thing where the person can actually own enough exit and entry Tor nodes, and they can kind of match your traffic still. Yeah. So this is partly why Tor is illegal in some countries, because they want to have a surveillance state, basically. They want to know everything you're doing. So they're like, well, it's not okay. Because Tor nodes are public. So everyone, there's a complete list of Tor nodes somewhere on the internet, and it's intentionally that way by design. There are pros and cons of that, but the point is that the government can, in principle, ban you from using Tor. And sometimes, if you're an exit node host, because you're basically the last guy in the chain, and you're communicating with the website, sometimes the people who own the exit node, because a lot of that traffic is going to sketchy websites, they will be harassed by the FBI or by law enforcement, or whatever the equivalent is in other countries. Okay, so the question is how much privacy are we? So we understand the infrastructure now. So the question is, how much privacy are we willing to give up for our convenience? Because when you're choosing convenience over privacy, basically you're making yourself a product. Because nowadays, for instance, Google is not a search engine company. It hasn't been for decades. It is an advertising company, and you are the product, because they are getting paid by advertising companies to advertise to you, so you're the product. And just think about all the stuff people use for Google. You've got Google Searches, you've got YouTube, you've got Google Calendar, Google Photos, Google Location Tracking, Google Maps. And for not Google, you've got social media, which some people use their real name or they get doxxed. You've got your online shopping. You've got the 23andMe, where you literally give people your DNA. So there's been people who've been busted for crimes they committed 3 or 4 decades earlier because a relative did 23andMe, and then the FBI like was like, I think this guy did it, so let me subpoena the relatives' DNA records, and then I don't know how I feel about that. I don't think that should be legal. It's kind of weird. Like you're subpoenaing somebody else for, you know what I mean? It's kind of weird. But anyway, that's the thing that happened.
In principle, that doesn't quite work with habeas corpus, as I would argue our founders and framers intended.
Yeah, that's my gut feeling. Exactly.
English law.
Yeah. So then, also as I said, WhatsApp, you should. I would not assume WhatsApp is actually secure. Telegram we know isn't anymore because like it is, but it isn't. Like it is, but they might just randomly give your information to the government. There are some lesser known ones which we can get to in a bit. Okay, so now what? So now we have all this information and it looks like everything's really bleak. So what do we do? Well, so the first thing is you have to actually decide what your threat model is. What are you? What threats are you willing to just tolerate? And then what threats are you going to actually take measures against? What are you willing to give up? So what information are you comfortable having be known and or sold? Because in this case, nowadays, known just means sold. If they know it, they're going to sell it. Like your car knows when you put on the brakes and it's going to sell it to an insurance company. Like that's ridiculous. I don't even know who thought of that. It's just so pathological, right? And what information is already accessible to the public. So if you have certain information that's already accessible to the public, then it's probably not too big of a deal if Google knows it also because they already know it because they're Google. What information is accessible to companies, what is already accessible to advertisers. So you think about that. And then what products can I trust? So as a general rule, large free and open source software is trustworthy because everybody can see the source code. And then nerds with way too much time on their hands, will look through all the code and make sure everything is safe. If it's like a lesser known one, you don't know just because it's open source, because I could just open source do something evil, right? and just hope no one notices. Then you've got like your Android. Android technically, I can't remember the full abbreviation, but there's like an Android stock thing that is technically open source. But then anything on your phone is not just the stock Android. It's been modified to send more stuff to Google, by which I mean all the stuff to Google. And then Samsung, I think I haven't looked into it, but the Samsung one probably just sends all your stuff to Google and to Samsung, so that's fun. So people have different things they try to do. So there's different operating systems you can flash onto certain phones. So there's one called Graphene OS, which is privacy focused. People didn't like the head developer for a while because apparently he was like a really nasty person, but he stepped down. So in my book, I'm like, okay, well that problem solved. And there are these huge debates between that one and Calyx OS and Lineage OS. But the point is there are options out there. So if we think, oh well, I mean, what can I do? It's either an Android or iPhone or Windows Phone, they're all bad, and I guess there's nothing I can do. There are other options. You just have to look for them, and my understanding is it's not too inaccessible even to the average not techie person. There are like instructions and you just follow the instructions. But I don't know, I haven't tried it myself. Android apps, can I trust the Android apps? So some Android apps are free and open source, and then those you can trust a bit more, right? So the question then you need to ask is like, who is going to target me? Which is going to be different for everybody. So for instance, we're going to be targeted by advertisers or insurance companies or whoever trying to make a quick buck off of us, or scammers trying to scam our parents. But if you're Tucker Carlson, you might be targeted by the FBI, who's just going to steal all his phone messages, which he should have known better. But anyway, and then the second is, what can you reasonably and meaningfully do yourself? Like I mentioned the thing with the router, but like, you're not gonna. No one knows. I won't say nobody. Most normal, sane people do not know how to build a router from scratch. That's just not happening. So you can not get it from your ISP, but you had to buy it from somewhere. Ultimately, you're trusting somebody to not be evil. So you can disperse the trust and the evilness and whatever, but you can't make your own chips. Right? Like you can buy them really cheap from China now, by the way, but you can't make your own chips unless you're, I guess, those Chinese people in China.
Well, what's to stop us from converting them and helping us out?
Well, yeah, but you're still not them, so you still have to trust them, right?
Okay,
This trust aspect does not go away.
Yeah, of course.
So then you need to make informed decisions, informed choices. So the reason that you've got all these VPN companies doing all these advertisements is because they realize people are afraid now that their privacy is going away. And they are also just contributing to the problem in some way because they're just fear-mongering. They're like, oh, I know things are really bad, but buy my product, that'll help, and it doesn't actually, right? That's just like one of the classic scams. Not all VPNs are like that, but the point is, you have to look at what it does and like whether it suits actually what you need. Because there are free VPNs, like, is Proton VPN free?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Proton VPN's free, which is through Proton Mail, which is a Swiss-based company. So the Swiss have tended to be, very tight-lipped, so there's that. There's 1.1.1 Warp or whatever from Cloudflare. Cloudflare's probably taking all your stuff, but, so you have to sort of decide, right? So you can, sometimes it's just distributing where all your information is going is a bit better. So let's even say you use Cloudflare. My phone has Cloudflare because I didn't bother installing Proton yet, but they see where I go, but they still can't see the traffic because the encryption is still separate, right? So the encryption's going through them, but they can't read it still. Then browsers. So I would recommend not using Chrome. I recently switched. I've been using it for years. It was like, oh, incognito. Yeah, there's a huge class action lawsuit now. Incognito was a lie. The cake was always a lie, apparently. So incognito was just straight up a lie. Like they were like, no, we said we weren't going to steal your data, but we just meant yours specifically. But we're just stealing yours and everybody else's, so it's actually okay. Like this is basically their argument. It's actually really crazy. Yeah, because they said it's being mass collected, so it's not individual.
Aggregate, right? Is that the
Yeah,
argument?
it was something
aggregation.
stupid like that. I don't know, but they're being sued. So I think for browsers you can use like Brave browser. You can use Firefox. Firefox is under threat for various reasons, which I won't get into. It's not super important. Brave, I think Brave is open source. So the confusing thing about this is Chrome is based on Chromium. Sounds similar, right? And it's because Chromium is also maintained by Google. But the difference is that Chromium is free and open source. Chrome is Chromium with God knows what else. And that's also given by Chrome. And they look kind of the same. And obviously, if you Google search for Chromium, Google will probably try to surreptitiously convince you to get Chrome somehow. Because, why not? You can obviously not use Google search, so that's something that's an option. So you can use Brave, you could also not use Google searching. So the question is really, are there equally convenient choices that do not give up privacy? Because you don't want to become a super paranoid guy living, you could go out, live in the middle of the desert, you'll probably be fine. But you don't want to do that, and that's that's reasonable to not want to do that. But are there equally convenient things that are not just letting my insurance company know that I hit the brakes 3 times today? It's just crazy, right? Not using a search. Nowadays, how good Google even is for searching is a bit questionable, because their goal is no longer to give you good search results.